Hi everyone, welcome back to the Score podcast. I'm Lilly Douse and you're listening to episode 2, Building on Bittensor. If you're new here, welcome. This is the show where we explore the powerful intersection of sport, technology, and decentralised AI. In episode 1, I hope you are watching, we looked at how Score began, what the platform was building, and why Score is the optic nerve of AI, bringing visual intelligence to football and beyond. Now, today's episode goes deeper into Bittensor. We're discussing what is Bittensor, the value it brings to the world, and why Score is building on it.
Robot footballers.
Oh yeah, no.
And get training data to train robot footballer. Like, you guys might actually be able to win a European Cup with robot footballer.
We have Max, the CEO of Score, and Will Squires, co-founder and CEO of Macrosomos. And of course, returning to give us his football lens, we have Brian McDermott. If you're enjoying this, please remember, like and subscribe and leave us a comment with your thoughts or questions for Will. We'll answer them in future episodes. But before we dive in, let's recap our mission and vision.
Yeah, just to touch on what we are trying to build. And I think it's very important for us to kind of make sure we repeat this and we make it obvious. And I'm really happy and proud that people take the time to kind of watch our episodes. I know that you and the team, we're putting a lot of effort in trying to make a easy way to enter the world of Bittensor, but also an easy way to understand why Score is building something new or different. So what we're really trying to do is, obviously, we try to bring a very innovative product in the world of football. It's based out of how do, AI understands sports. So our vision is pretty simple. We have to bring an easy way to get the data, teach the machines, and then score what's happening against an outcome. So it could be a goal, could be a foul, and it sounds a lot around football, but actually the beautiful thing around Score is you could do more with this. The only reason we are sticking to football is because obviously we're football fans, we're well connected in football. And also, it sounds good. When we talk about sports, you can get people as brilliant as Will talking about deep AI and then talking about his favorite thing. And this is just a fun moment. So we're trying to combine all of that, and we're trying to help small businesses, as in small clubs or even larger businesses, to have access to like state-of-the-art tech that is actually extremely expensive to try to built in-house, or to even just pay, as tools on the market. And our journey in football kind of just, taught us about how we could make it bigger, even for us, or just because we want to pay back something to Bittensor and we want to make sure that we're leaving something, as a contributor, and this is very important for us. So when you go back to what we had to do in football, which is grabbing the data from the video footage, running AI to understand what is happening, and then scoring the movement against an outcome, you could actually do this for a lot of different industries. It could be self-driving cars. It could be, malls and, trying to prevent shoplifting from happening. It could be medical imagery. It could be satellite imagery. I'm not saying this, and I don't want to sound like a team, of people being all over the place. This is not the case. I think the beauty of crypto is that we had some precedent, like, as in people are calling this L1s, blockchains that were built for other people to build something on top of it, on top of them and create meaningful things. I think part of our thesis is that a Bittensor subnet could be kind of an L1, a new sort of L1, and I don't think it would divert us from our goal. I think it's just a way for us to open new opportunities for people to benefit from all the work, effort, and resources we poured into this subnet. So this is why we're going out with this concept of the optic nerve of AI. Obviously, it sounds good, but beyond that, we really want to help anyone, any type of businesses that is using a sensor, as in a camera or video footage, to process that and to get to the expected output, as in using AI, in a very simple, affordable, and open way, so that they could also keep building on top of it, and they're not linked to a commercial agreement or so. So that's our thesis. We really believe that there's a whole part of the world that would really need to have access to good computer vision models. So it's our mission and also our vision. We think, and pun intended, obviously. But yeah, that's why we are, obviously waking up in the morning, and also this is what keeps us up at night.
Such an amazing mission and vision. It's so exciting that what's to come. Why not take a little bit of a tech deep dive? I think it's a good place to start. We have Will here. So welcome, Will. It's great to have you with us. So let's start at the very beginning, so you can just explain a little bit about yourself and what led you to Bittensor and eventually being the co-founder of Macrosomos.
Thanks, Lily. So I'm Will. I'm the CEO of Macrosomos, which means I get to do all the least fun work. Like people assume like the CEO job is actually the fun job. It's just you have to do the stuff nobody else wants to do at the last point of the line. But I guess my background, my original degrees are in civil engineering. I spent a couple years in in old industries that weren't using technology, which is kind of relevant to this conversation. And was kind of boggled by how inefficient these sectors were, how little they were applying. Like the buzzword was big data back then before AI, but kind of got into that, and I did another degree in machine learning at the time and was kind of blown away by the opportunity that technology pivoted from trying to build things in concrete to trying to build things in code, and ended up sort of building increasingly large tech teams within FTSE 100s before jumping into the startup space 4 or 5 years ago. So for me, my Bittensor journey is all the fault of my co-founder. My co-founder, Steph, I met him 16 years ago. We're very old friends. We met jumping out of planes. And he ended up working for the OpenTensor Foundation, ended up being the CTO of the OpenTensor Foundation. And I met Jacob, the founder of Bittensor, out in Mexico when I was seeing him. And Jake tried to hire me. I was like, what is this wacky crypto AI project? But one of the things I liked about Bittensor, and the simplest way I had of explaining it logically, was that the main critique of crypto that I sort of had seen from an economic level was the critique of Bitcoin, where at times you're burning energy that is the scale of a country. Like it's like somewhere between Denmark and Hungary right now, solely for the purpose of securing money, which in and of itself is not a bad problem. People built Fort Knox solely for the purpose of securing money. But the energy usage, like the really simple and compelling answer to me about Bittensor was, what if you could use all of that energy to do something that was higher value and higher order? So there's a really interesting chart The Economist posted, which we've used before, that shows the scale of growth of AI data centers, and then the fact that crypto data centers are up here, which is a really novel idea. And you're seeing it across the market that a lot of people who are in Bitcoin are now pivoting to support AI. But what if you could create incentives that the compute that was used to secure Bitcoin could do valuable work, could create intelligence, could solve football club problems and all those other pieces. And that was the sort of like root idea for me about Bittensor that was really sticky, like this concept of proof of useful work. So I ended up working at the foundation for a month or so, more on sort of, I guess, strategy, working with Jacob and others on positioning. I was there when Revolution, the sort of many subnets launch, happened. And after that, Stefan, who was, still building the foundation and building Subnet 1, the first subnet. One of the brilliant things about Bittensor is they push things away, like the foundation, the people who've built it. They bring people in, pill them on the project, then they say, go out into the wild and incentivize yourself. And like Bittensor is the art of incentives above all else. Jacob, his father makes games. Like it's a kind of weird thing people don't know about him, and maybe that's a private thing, but I don't know if you met his dad in Paris, Max, but he's a game maker. And you realize Bittensor is all about this game where there are economic prizes, but at its heart, people are competing in the realms of intelligence. They're competing in the realms of computer vision. They're competing in the realms of training like huge machine learning models, and competitive economic forces are arguably the bread and butter of capitalism, and applying them to the creation of technology is quite novel in that space. It's kind of like a condensation of the VC market with the capital market. So that was a bit of a rambling introduction, I guess. But on that topic of pushing things out, the foundation basically were running Subnet 1. They built this first subnet as a proof of concept. And when 32 other subnets appeared, they said, well, we can't write the rules and play the game. It's unfair. So you guys are, Stefan, you're fired. Go off and build in the wild. And he called me and was like, hey, do you want to start this business? And we've been doing this like for every few years. One of us calls the other and was like, hey, is it time to quit our jobs and start a business? For 5 years, he's been having babies. And this time I was like, no, I have like a job. I'm like building augmented reality headsets, which is a whole other story. But eventually he convinced me, and we span out Macrosomos last year. We're about 15 months old. And I guess for a brief intro to Macrosomos, we sort of position ourselves as an AI research lab and a decentralized AI research lab second, but a lot of our work is around the fundamental things you need to be able to do to incentivize and distribute the task, training, creation, and utility of artificial intelligence. So when we came to Bittensor, we looked at, it's very simple to say that crypto AI projects will just beat centralized systems. It's kind of like a classic trope in crypto. They're just like, oh, we've built a protocol layer, but yeah, we're totally going to just win now and it's going to be better. And lo and behold, none of them do. There's a lot of like disappointment in crypto because people focus on the tokenomics layer, the core protocol technology, but not some of the other parts. And the reality is AI is a research game. Like, we haven't found all of the novel pieces. It's a research game and it's an orchestration of compute game. Find the algorithm that gives you an edge, an inch a mile, and then apply it ruthlessly at scale. And Bittensor is very good at applying things ruthlessly at scale, compute, intelligence, exploits, take your pick. And we can get into that a bit later. But at Macrosomos, we wanted to build all of the pieces that you need in a frontier lab in a decentralized way. So we operate a giant web scale data scraping subnet that Max has played with and uses in some of their products called Subnet 13. It's the largest ever open source accumulation of social media data. It was my first eureka moment in Bittensor because we just incentivized people to scrape as many rows of data as possible. And people kept scraping insane amounts. I think at peak, we've scraped over 350 million rows a day, which is basically indexing all of Reddit and X, which kind of doesn't make sense. We've added YouTube and some other stuff, but this is kind of a point that these things are powerful. Like, I have no idea how to build a web scraper. Most of my team don't. Some random people off in a hole in the internet have just found ways to crawl the biggest platforms in the world. And that's kind of the beauty of Bittensor. We operate a recently relaunched training subnet called IOTA, which is, I would say, in simple terms, trying to take the current meta of training very large language models in dedicated data centers and split it up around the world and make it available to distributed computer sets, low availability computer sets, or consumer compute. So like, there's a version of this that's training at home on lots of MacBooks. And we operate a couple other subnets focused on agentic intelligence and decentralized science. So there's probably too much to talk about all the specific things on that. But I don't know whether we want to go on the Bittensor topic.
I think a good start would be kind of, I can tell that you have really in-depth knowledge, but for some of our listeners that maybe are more into the football element of things or are new to the space, how would you kind of describe it in the most simple terms possible? So what is exactly Bittensor in simple terms, and how does it differ from centralized AI that people might be aware of, like OpenAI or DeepMind or something like that? How does it differ to those? And also what you're doing at Macrosomos, how is that different? So if we can kind of compare it to what people might know of, and how we can put it in kind of simple terms.
Okay, so people think of Bittensor as a decentralized AI protocol, and it's become that, but the actual core logic of it is about incentives. And so writing incentives is about anything you might choose to incentivize. So if we use the example of data I spoke about, you can write an incentive mechanism which incentivizes someone to provide lots and lots of data. And this could be Twitter data, Reddit data, take your pick, anything. It could be news articles. And you can express that in technology, and you create a competition. And the competition is, I will reward you with Tau, with this token, where basically depending on how much data you provide. And on day one, somebody might provide 100 rows of data. Lily, you might just be like downloading your Twitter posts. And then somebody the next day comes and downloads 1,000 rows of data. Max might be using an API or something like that. And so Max gets all of the money. You don't get anything anymore, Lily. So the next day you're like, well, Max is screw Max. I want my money again. So you go and buy 10 API accounts and you run them all at once and you have 10,000 rows. And so Max is like super pissed the next day. And Max comes back and Max goes and buys 40,000 Twitter accounts in Russia that he sets up across the world to download. And this is literally what happened on 13. Like the current best miners they were buying bot farms off bot farms to use them to pull data and index it to scrape, which is kind of insane when you think about it, that people go to all these lengths. But if you think that the idea is to apply these competitive forces through rewards, now map that across different ideas. What Max and the guys are doing at Score is, and I'm going to completely butcher this, Max, that they're incentivizing people to pull little bits of actions and data from video footage of a football game or a sports game. So a lot of like very expensive companies in the world have built systems that do this, like Opta. They've spent hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, like perfecting these models. What Max and the team do is say, okay, I'm going to incentivize you based on the quality and number of actions you can track. So on first day, Lily, you go and sit there. I don't know why I'm always giving you like a pen and paper, but you sit and you just note down the positions and actions and do that. Maybe somebody like co-ops an Opta AI, or somebody starts training their own model that does this. And then somebody trains a better model and a better model and a better model. So it's this competitive force that makes it better. And the reason it's focused on AI is the most important technology of our time. It is the thing that will change everything. It's the thing that's bleeding back into legacy businesses and saying, well, how do you run a football club? Is it a classic, hire the best guy or girl who then solves the problem? Or do you fundamentally need to rethink how these businesses work and operate in a world that's completely populated by technology? And that's why mostly Bittensor is expressed as a decentralized AI protocol, but really you could incentivize anything that you want with it. You could incentivize like cat pictures or something nonsensical, because the language of it lets you express these different things and create competitions for people to work in. And there's a multitude of different competitions in Bittensor. There's 128. There are people trying to incentivize cancer research and like the detection of melanomas in skin. So you take a picture of that, and I know there's a team that's looking at trying to identify like different types of rashes or skin conditions, which is actually quite like an open problem. It's quite novel, and if you have enough training data and other pieces of that, you can solve this with an AI system. We run a subnet called Mainframe that focuses on decentralized science. We originally started by folding proteins. Now, people may remember there was a whole thing called Folding at Home about 5 or 10 years ago, where everybody could like contribute your spare computational work and like help fold proteins and cure cancer and do vaccines and all these wonderful things. And, it maps quite elegantly to Bittensor, which you say, well, people did that for free. But this is actually a really useful commodity that people pay for in the marketplace. There's an immense amount of money in drug discovery and medical research. So we built an incentive mechanism to incentivize that. And I suppose for context, Folding at Home was the largest ever citizen compute project in history. Something like 1.5 teraflops of GPU compute, which is it's a load of computers. On Mainframe, we managed to beat that. I think we had 1.8 at a certain point. And this is all through the rails of crypto incentives. So whereas you think it took something like 4 or 5 years for Folding at Home to organize that amount of resource and solve that problem, we had a similar amount of compute in a space of 3 months, I think, from launch. And this
Wow.
is like focusing on basically these problems. So there's a lot of different applications for Bittensor. We've covered a couple of them with sports and science and data, but it's this ability to massively organize resources around a problem really, really quickly and get scale, I think, that makes it quite unique.
Yeah, I was actually listening to a podcast with Kathy Woods, and it was so interesting how she was just concentrating on AI being the biggest industry to invest in. She also mentioned a lot about healthcare. I'm sure if she was aware of Score, she'd be talking about the utilities in sport as well. It's so incredible how this data is so useful, but it needs to be processed in the right ways. And that's what I think Bittensor enables. But if we kind of imagine that this path works exactly as we're envisioning, what does the future kind of look like for Bittensor in the next couple of years? As you were saying, it's all moving so quickly. So even if it's shorter time frame than that, what are you really seeing?
I think history is a useful anecdote for this sometimes. So when I first started working on Bittensor at the Open Tensor Foundation, we were using really primitive tools. It's kind of like the relative Stone Age. So a lot of the early incentive systems we were building were about trying to create things that look like GPT, like in really simple terms. And we had this idea of reward models where we were like trying to work out a way of calculating intelligence to evaluate it and incentivize it, which is actually kind of one of the biggest problems in AI. Because there's a certain point when you're training these language models that and I'll go back to the other idea. When we first trained language models, 100 people like yourself, Lilly and Max and others sat and wrote down the answers and annotations that they thought the model should train to. Like, you have this idea of training data. Most language models effectively teach themselves, but you're trying to like guide the direction and training of this model into a way that it becomes more intelligent through time. The reality is, as you're training models that are 1 trillion parameters, they take months to train. They're absorbing the entire corpus of human knowledge. That becomes really difficult, and it becomes really difficult to evaluate how one model is better than another. So what you do is you use other models to train other models. So you have models that generate question-answer pairs. It's called reinforcement learning, and you just continuously improve the models through more and more synthetic data. So you generate data from one model that you use to make another model better. And that was what we were doing with Bittensor, but with really, really crap models. So this was now maybe 18 months ago. And this was like subnet one at its first point. It was like, can we create data to try evaluate people creating models and make better models through time? And like the explosion of technology since then is kind of insane. Like, we have 128 subnets, which are all like different versions of this that are way better than the first original one we did. Like, a lot of people foolishly tried to build from the subnet template, which was this like idea of a subnet we had back then, which just didn't work. But, there's infinite expressibility now in terms of what you can build. Computer vision, like compute subnets. I'm trying to think of what's a good one. Like, there's a subnet that mines Bitcoin, so you can kind of contain all of crypto inside Bittensor because of the way it's written, which I will not go off onto because that's a whole sidebar.
Yeah.
But what I would also say is within individual subnets, there are sort of ideas that 18 months ago or even 12 months ago were really simple that have now become really powerful. So one of the core permits there's kind of 2 big blocks of work in an AI company like OpenAI. One is make the models, training, building, creating, thinking. The other is, arguably it's data, train the model, and then put the model into production so you can access it. And that's called inference. And within Bittensor, there's a bunch of inference subnets. And they are basically just making sure you can talk to the model, providing tokens to the model. Whenever you ask a model something, it produces a response, but that needs to run on a computer somewhere. And the original Bittensor subnets were very primitive in their inference capabilities. You're trying to talk to them, they're slow, they're clunky, they occasionally cut a response off. The premier inference subnet now produces tokens at a speed comparable with where Google was a year ago, which is kind of boggling when you think this is a multi-trillion-dollar company globally, and Bittensor is a bunch of people in basements hacking stuff together, or in lofty Parisian flats if you're Max. But like that's where I would say is like if you tune these incentives, they become very powerful. What a lot of teams are focused on, what we're focused on, is making the incentives better, because that's the core art of Bittensor. How do you make the competition more competitive? How do you make the curve steeper? How do you make it go up faster? How do you make it slightly more efficient or economically available or otherwise, that when you take these things to market, they can be cheaper and better? So in a year, it's a really hard question. If I think some of our sublets we've iterated on 5 times in the space of a year. So if you think the training sublet we recently launched, we used to have this idea where we get people to compete to train a model. So like you and Max would both compete, and you'd upload a model at some point, and whoever was better won. But the thing is, if you won, Lilly, the next round you can both take the model and compete, and maybe Max wins off your model, so he can steal your work. So there's some collaborative element to it. What we're basically doing with IOTA, a recent subnet we released, and this is like the sort of like edge of our, I guess, the technology we're building, is we now have groups of miners training parts of the model and then competing on the bits of the model they train, and then sharing that downstream and adding it all together and creating one big mega model. And there's a lot of complexity in that, and I'm not going to get into the detail of it, so I'm not the CTO. But what it actually means is you have competitive and collaborative forces, and you can train really, really big models. So frontier models, the best models in the world, are about 1 trillion parameters. The biggest models that have been trained on decentralized mechanisms today there's currently a training run starting at 14 billion. Of 40 billion, we trained at 14 billion in our old architecture, and we intend to train 100 or 400 or trillion parameter model, which is much closer to state of the art, but kind of hard. So I've rambled a lot there. Max, you should like throw something in on this.
No, definitely. No, everything I could say would sound completely stupid compared to you, Will. So I would just say, and you can quote this, in the podcast, Bittensor is a competition. That's why it resonates well with Score. I'm kidding. I'm just teasing you guys. No, I think what's really important, and I definitely want to chime in here, is so Will, Steph, Macrosomos, they were like first teams to really work on creating subnets and try to kind of set the first version of the game. We probably entered the game like 6 months after them, or probably 8 months after them, and the space for us was already looking like, we had some precedent to kind of rely on and try to, test and change and upgrade and fork and yada. So honestly, they did a lot of the work that was useful for us to then try, and get a shot at Bittensor. What we realized is something we also shared with Will on stage at Proof of Talk in Paris, like a few weeks ago, is that I think it's very hard for people that are actually building on Bittensor to know how Bittensor is going to look like in a year's time, because the speed at which we're operating is absolutely crazy. And we also had one key pivot within 8 months. And now we're competing against companies that will, as just mentioned, that are for some of them, multi-billion-dollar company. And it's crazy. So every time you would ask the question, Lilly, to someone that, is working on Bittensor, what Bittensor is going to look like in a year, I think that's probably the hardest question for us. What we can say as subnet owners and builders is, I think it would look like something that is moving even faster, and probably something that would, I would say, not just compete from a tech perspective with Web 2 companies, I would say, but probably also be more known as independent products. I think subnets would become products. People would go on IOTA, for instance, as they are jumping on any other training, tool that they could be using in Web 2 without even knowing about the subnet. So I think maybe I would say in a year time, or what I would like to see happening would be probably an abstraction from the subnet world itself. And also what I would vouch for and try to work hard on, and that's the reason that I think we're very, very proud of working with Macrosomos and using Subnet 13, for instance, is more subnet call coordination, cooperation, or even competition, because I think that there could be like a meta competition happening on Bittensor. I know some people are doing protein folding as well. I'm sure Macrosomos is going to, or maybe already is going to do better. And then they're probably going to see. No, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, I would never bet against Macrosomos. That's something people should remember as well. I like that. I like the idea that we could one day work together, help each other, introduce ourselves to customers or partners, and then the other day try to see how we could check their code and probably try to improve it, or still a part of the code to kind of run something that would, make them react and say, oh, we have to do better. I think this is a very sound approach to how tech has to be built. And this is also why it gets so addictive. But yeah, I would say in a year's time, I'd like to see more abstraction and more coordination between subnets.
Awesome. Yeah, Will, I have to say your description of explaining about Bittensor was absolutely awesome. Even for myself, I feel like you brought a lot more clarity to exactly what it is and why it's so important that Score is building on Bittensor. But so let's keep on that theme of Score. So you've seen exactly what Max and the team are building. So what are your personal thoughts on our goal to democratize access to visual intelligence?
I think it's hard for me to like separate the two parts of myself. One is that is like thoughtful businessman that responds to that, and the other that's like, I was debating whether I should wear my Macrosomos on my Spurs shirt to this. And like half of mine and Max conversations just like shit talking about football, and half of it's actually like thoughtful stuff. I think what's really interesting about Score, and like I touched on it earlier when I was talking about legacy industries, is that there's an interesting concept going on in venture capital right now where people are going around and buying old businesses on the basis that by applying AI and advanced technology, they can multiply the value by a factor of 10, 100. So not thinking of it from a basis of, oh, I'm going to start a concept, start up with a new idea, we're going to completely reinvent this industry, but saying, here's the industry, here's the business, the technology is readily available on the market or can be designed and incented. And I'm just going to transform that business and make it 10 times more productive instantaneously. And there was a big push from a lot of this, actually, I think, arced out from like McKinsey and Quantum Black and the sort of very, very discrete consulting model where they go in and they started doing digital transformational companies. I worked with McKinsey and Quantum Black for a couple of years, and they're very, very good at it. But it's now become more de jure as like an idea in the marketplace that you can buy a food services and delivery business or buy a football club and make it better with technology. So I think what's compelling about Score is you have this stack of like the very biggest companies in the world. So, your Tottenhams, your Arsenals, your Manchester United have been throwing millions of dollars at this for years. And they have distributed success. Some of them are clearly very successful because they're multi-billion-dollar businesses. Some of them are less successful, like Arsenal, who can never win anything because they're Arsenal. And that's fine. They're never going to be successful.
Brutal.
There you go. Well, it's just like the only success that really matters is European success, Max. So we can pick on that. But I think what's interesting about this is it maps across a lot of industries. If you go and look at the legal profession, you have Harvey, $200 billion raise, I think, or something insane like that, which is trying to basically take all of the business of these like middling sized legal shops that don't necessarily know what they're going to do and don't really know how to utilize technology, but are viable businesses that have a lot of value and intelligence. And I think if you map that idea of like taking a sports club, providing all these technologies to help them modernize, you can help make businesses that aren't just the FTSE 100 and otherwise actually really competitive. We've thought of this a lot with IOTA about how you could gather together a bunch of people that maybe want to train a model that don't have the native expertise, that don't have the data, that don't have the compute infrastructure, and you can help them compete on the world stage. And by nature, these businesses are not one team owning everything, raising everything. They're going to be doing something that is more distributed or decentralized, like pick your other word. So I think for me, this is a real niche for a lot of these technologies. It's easy to sit here and be like, oh, we're going to be OpenAI. The amount of capital being deployed is really, really hard to beat. If we do beat OpenAI, that'd be great. What's more interesting is, can we provide a third way? Like, I'm really going to go back to like Tony Blair economics, right? It's like you combine some of these social forces with market forces. In this case, it's like functioning businesses with available technology, and you can create something that helps these businesses compete in the marketplace by accessing the state of the art when previously they might not be able to afford to, or organize to, or even know what they're buying. So maybe that's my answer on Score.
I'll have to say that Will is probably the only person who's a Spurs fan and I can really get along with. So
Do we have to?
Are you an Arsenal fan?
I'm a Gooner, yes. That's why I'm sat
Oh,
here like, oh no.
God. Dear me.
yeah. So that being said,
Cool, guys. Next year.
I don't even think about it anymore. I mean, I think the worst thing was when they decided to put like golden details on the on the kit, and I was like, this is not a good idea. We're definitely going to jinx it. But anyway, this is another conversation. No, so I think what you said, Will, is very interesting, and this is probably also why we are a bit different, in Bittensor. I think from the very beginning we didn't enter this game saying we're going to be OpenAI or we're going to be smarter than Macrosomos or other teams. We really entered the game saying we think we could solve a business problem, and we think we could use what you guys started as more of a research project, and we can turn it into like something that would be really providing value for the outside world in very, very simple use cases. I think maybe the best thing about Score, I think it's super simple. And then it's also sometimes the worst thing, because people are going to be like, yeah, but are you guys really pushing the needle? I think using Bittensor, you are pushing the needle anyway, because the sheer amount of intelligence and compute power people are bringing on our subnet to get to a point where we can compete with big companies is incredible. But yeah, we never wanted to be that kind of team to brag about things we can't do. What we can really do, and it's like signing deals with real businesses and help smaller football clubs, for instance, to go higher in leagues and use some of the tech that only, for instance, Brighton or Liverpool can have access to. And I think that's the beauty of a simple concept. Sometimes you just don't have to reinvent the wheel. I would just add one thing on that is, I think actually, if you think about it, all subnets could have the same approach. So it could be like helping your validators to create a front end, or your miners to think in a slightly different way, the way they are bringing intelligence to you. But I think what I'd like is seeing people do what we did by being inspired by Macrosomos. I hope new subnets are going to try to see that when you come with a level of simplicity and just trying to solve one problem, you could be successful as a subnet as well. So that would be our best contribution, I would say, within Bittensor. And if we go back to football, I touched on it, in the intro. We definitely want to be involved in buying a football club. We're very close from closing a deal with a football club in England. And we're not doing this because, we like running like headless chickens. It does have a meaning. What we want to do is we want to prove that a subnet could help people in real life. Like, we want to be able to shoot content with the manager from this club saying, before working with a subnet, we were having a hard time doing X, Y, and Z, and now we could do new things, and now it allowed us to get to new levels. And honestly, obviously, we have a vested interest in that. The business is going to be more valuable if we do this, but also we're going to be very happy to make that happen and see people like looking at Bittensor saying, "Oh, you can do research, but you could also do like a real product." and help people in real life.
Yeah, that's so true. It is a great way to see it as kind of like a puzzle that all fits together and everything is kind of helping, collaborating and helping to improve the ecosystem in general. But for both of you, how important it is visual intelligence when it comes to achieving human level AI, and how is Score such an integral part of this puzzle?
So I think that's probably the next step for Score. At the moment, we're really focusing on, football, and we want to create this first strong use case. But then if you try to extrapolate and see how you could help people with an open source technology, you're going to have to think about all the resources, all the efforts, that have been put in making Score like a real product. You kind of have to think how we can like pay something to the community, or bring something to the community, pay back what people brought us and what made us quote unquote successful. We're a very small company. I'm not talking like I'm Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos here, but I'm saying I think at some point you have to think about your tech as it was super helpful for us to go from 0 to 1. Now how can we make it grow and help other people do this? How can we make, for instance, maybe not everyone wants to run a subnet, but maybe people want to have access to a layer or something like that, or a workflow where they could have access to data annotation, then some level of training on visual scenes, and then maybe a way to put a score on what happened. That could be people running malls to prevent shoplifting, self-driving car companies. I don't really know yet. I think it's also something you have to realize about Bittensor is that it kind of gets it's a humbling experience. You have to really know that you don't know. So we're just trying to pay back basically and see how we could provide the infrastructure we're creating to other people, and make it affordable and open source.
Robot footballers.
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
That's like you're doing like all the practical, like, oh, we're gonna detect shoplifting. Like what we need to do is like stick cameras on all the footballers' heads and get training data to train robot footballer. Like you guys might actually be able to win a European Cup with robot football.
I was sure. Yeah, no, I'm not meaning to add something.
I'm gonna come back to it.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably Arteta is kind of robot football manager, but that's a different debate.
Well, Elon Musk is kind of doing it with his robotic models. He's achieved quite a lot. Like the dancing robot was pretty impressive, what he's done so far. So, yeah, who knows? We could have a new striker that's a robot.
But what's interesting about this is like what a lot of Boston Robotics and Tesla are doing is what's like the general case for AI. And, the general case is often the most important thing. It's what people are doing with large foundation models today. Like we're training general intelligence that knows everything. But the reality is when you're trying to do a very specific task at a very competitive level, like being a Premier League footballer, you have to go to the specialized case. It's not going to be good enough. Like a Boston Robotics footballer might, like, until it reaches the point that it's like God at all activities around the physical realm, it's not going to beat Lionel Messi. But if you explicitly train it to be better than Lionel Messi and make it work around those things, that's where you're going to get an edge. And I think this is one of the things I think is important about Bittensor is like with any major like shelling point technology, what happens is people assume that it's going to be one-off or it's not going to be used. And what always happens is you just do more of it. So right now we're talking about, only the big labs are training models and doing that. The more obvious trend is everyone is going to be training models to do stuff. Everyone is going to need data. Everyone is going to be inferencing stuff because it's just what happens with every big technology. Like with the car, they were like, oh, it's for replacing small horses. And, my sire will take it from their estate. And now everybody has like 5 cars and a scooter and 2 bikes. So like, again, technology, it becomes industrialized, it produces. Like Bittensor is kind of a technology for industrialists. Like you bring an idea and it gets industrialized here. It's kind of its superpower. So like, I think there's a load of secondary use cases from what Max and the guys are doing. They probably have the largest open source labeled data set of football data in the world by now.
Yep. So
like, let me train an Omni model and then we can build Robo Footballer.
Oh yeah, let's do it, bro.
But this is the sort of thing where in a year we'll be like, oh yeah, we trained 3 robot footballer models, none of them were that
Yeah, yeah.
good, but we found out that actually like the ball boy model was really good, and it was kind of great. And maybe it's not like, but I laugh about these things, but the pace of tech, like the pace of tech in AI is insane. Like I've never worked in an industry that moves so quickly, and you build something and then you're like, oh well shit, someone else has built something that completely invalidates 3 months of work. And the same's true of Bittensor, and I think of Score. So yeah, I'm sure we're going to be on a podcast in 3 months, and you're going to be like, we were completely wrong about all this, Max, and like I thought I was right, and it sucked, and it was the
But I
direction
would
was
never,
wrong.
I would never be a Spurs fan anyway. But yeah,
You wait. But the reality is, if you're actually having that conversation, you'll be saying, well, we found a way cleverer way of doing it that took half the resources
yeah,
and was quicker.
yeah, definitely.
And that's kind of the beauty of all of it.
100%.
Awesome, Will. This has been such an insightful conversation, even though you are a Spurs fan. That's the only thing that lets you down. But I know you've got to drop off now, so me and Matt can continue the proper football chats with Arsenal and not with Spurs. But yeah, for any kind of like
The
final
uncompetitive
comments,
ones where you guys sit and agree.
well, like deep down, we're hurting
there you
right
go.
now. But for you know, how do you see this? I know we've said like the next year it's really hard to predict, but what excites you the most about this space? Like I can tell that, yeah, everything we've spoken about, you really do enjoy it. But what makes you wake up and think, gosh, this part of technology really is transforming the world as we know it?
I think like the thing that Bittensor's worst at is its marketing. Like, and it's a weird thing where like when you're in here, you kind of get boggled every day by the fact someone's doing something, or this thing works, or like the 40th subnet, like there's like a like slot like 60, like the 60th worst subnet has like a working compute client I found the other day. I'm like, what? It's just like, what do you mean that? Like, even the top 20, even the top 30, like, what is this? So I think Bitsensor's a marketing problem, and you guys doing great work to solve that. So thank you. But I think starting to see more of the results, like as a research organization, we're very like technically aware of the work happening, which is less sexy than marketing, but like you're aware of the level of actually really quite impressive stuff going on. And I think getting that out into the world is the major stake. And I think we need something that comes out that brings together a lot of the work on Bittensor in a simple way that means people can take notice. And you know, maybe it's going to be a football cup, guys. Who knows?
Let's hope so.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Will, for your time. That really was so insightful. Max, do you have anything else to add on what we've been discussing? I know anyone out there that does have any questions, please leave us a few comments. Any questions that you want answered, we will make sure to do that. And don't forget as well, if you haven't already joined our Discord, check the link in the description and join this conversation. Max, anything else you want to say?
Yeah, that was a great. I think Will really, brought a lot of good details about what's Bittensor. I hope people would ask a lot of questions, and then I also hope we'll have Will again on the podcast. So yeah, no, nothing really for me to add here, but I think just watch this podcast, go back and try to really get what Will is saying, because yeah, you had a very, very good, description of what Bittensor is.
Yeah, everyone, it's your chance to add to the conversation. So please do leave us as many comments as possible. Let's bring Brian back into the mix. Brian, you've been following the Club World Cup so far. We've now completed the group stage and the first knockout rounds. Teams definitely seem to be taking this very, very seriously. It's definitely not a pre-season. This is something which they are all wanting to win. So what really has been catching your eye so far?
Well, obviously Man City going out the other day is a big one. We didn't expect that. And, you look at that result and you could see that City had put out their strongest team. They're trying to win the tournament. So that was a blow to them. Anyone can lose a game of football, but that was a massive blow to City, I would suggest. And I think he felt that he was getting things right, and I think he will get things right this year. The manager at City, Guardiola, obviously is top. So that will be interesting how that goes for them this season. And what's happened in this tournament is I look at PSG and I saw it, the PSG into Miami game, and the first half performance for PSG was just another level. They look like the best team in the tournament. Doesn't mean to say they're going to win it. And the way that the tournament's panned out, Bayern Munich played PSG in the next game in the quarterfinal, which is a bit of a shame, really, because that's kind of a game that you'd love to see in the final. Who's going to win that? And it's a toss of a coin. PSG look the better team, but Bayern Munich can beat anybody on their day. But it's opened up for Chelsea. If you look at Man City have gone out, and Chelsea look like they're on the favourable side of that draw now. So, it could end up a PSG Chelsea final. It could end up a Chelsea Munich final. You never know.
Yeah, there's so much that's been happening. I was on an aeroplane, God knows when. I've been travelling a lot, and I was watching the Bayern Benfica match, and that was quite shocking. Just that Bayern had so much possession, and they just couldn't score. It kind of looked like they were a bit exhausted as well, though. I guess the heat has been a telling factor as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, I've actually managed in those conditions, and just standing on the line is bad enough. I've played in those conditions, and it is different. It is so different, and it is very, very difficult. And people should say, well, the South Americans are used to playing in these conditions. The European players aren't used to playing. We have pre-season games where, or generally, I remember actually as a player, the first game of the season was always like red hot for whatever reason. I remember playing for Arsenal, and we played Luton back in 1983 when Charlie Nicholas made his debut, and it was so hot that day. I'll never forget. But it's always the first day of the season where it's really, really hot. It does make a bit of a difference. It really does.
Yeah, and even with like the 2-hour stoppages, how would that kind of affect the players in the tournament mentally? They just want to get out and play. So what kind of impact can that have on the matches?
It's massive impact. 2-hour stoppages are they're unheard of, and there has been stoppages in this tournament. The weather, obviously, the players, looking after the players is the most important thing. But one of the problems you've got is if you stop a game for an hour and a half or 2 hours, obviously the momentum of the game changes. But then you've got to start again, then you've got to warm up again, then you've got to do whatever. And the risk of injuries are there for all to see. It's not ideal. You could have a rule where you say if you get to 80 minutes that the game's finished, but who's going to want that rule? If someone's 1-0 down, they can always try and get back and compete and win the game. So no, it's a tough one, and there's not much you can do about the weather. You can't control that situation.
Yeah, and what are you excited to see coming up? I know we've got a couple of matches happening in the next couple of days. I think it's the 4th and 5th of July. You mentioned about being excited about watching PSG again, but is there any teams to really look out for that you think could be making the final, or is it quite obvious right now who's going to be there?
Well, after the Man City result, nothing's obvious, and nothing ever is obvious in football. It doesn't matter what level, you have to be right. Once again, that game, PSG versus Bayern Munich, what a top game to watch. Both teams want to win this tournament. You can absolutely tell that. But I would say that I think now looking at Chelsea and what they're doing, and that they've got a major chance. And if they can get to the final, anything can happen on any given day. So, no, I'm looking forward to it. I wanted to watch Messi play the other day. The first half against PSG, he never had a touch of the ball. Second half, he showed absolutely what he's all about at times, even though they were 4-0 down. So it was brilliant to watch him, and it always is brilliant to watch him.
Yeah, and how do we think as well going into the season this could have an impact? Because this is so competitive. Do we think it could have an impact on the teams going into the season where they are going to be a bit exhausted after this tournament as well?
Well, there's an argument for that. But what you don't want to do as a professional club, and the managers won't let this happen, and to have excuses. You can't go into season with excuses. Nowadays, if you talk as a manager and you talk about your injuries and you talk about players, what you haven't got, who you haven't got, it gets to a point when no one's interested. The only show in town is to try to find a way to win, and the best managers in the world, that's how they go about their business. You know, your Ancelottis, the Mourinhos, the Pep Guardiolas, they find a way to win, and there's no excuses. And there can't be. This is a tournament. There's a lot of money involved. It's a prestigious tournament, and once you're in it, you're in it.
Yeah, and have there been any standout individual performances as well that people should be looking out for, and especially with transfer market, what have you been thinking about some of the players out there?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's always standout players there, and you know the level that they're playing at. They are what they are. You know, they're fantastic players. I always look really at the teams, and I sort of look at. I keep going on about PSG, but it's been since I watched PSG against Inter Milan in that Champions League final. I honestly believe that this season you will see a real change in how football's played. You know, we saw a slower possession-based game for a number of years. I think we're going back to pace and power. I think we're going back to wingers who can beat people, who can go past people. A lot of teams play with a low block. Well, that's the way to beat a low block. Players that have got unbelievable ability that can run with the ball, and I think you'll see that. And I think a lot of teams will design their teams in the way that PSG are playing.
Yeah, and in terms of that as well, the transfer market for the next season, like what's caught your eye? I mean, I know. As Arsenal fans, we haven't had too much movement. What are we hoping to see? Do we think there's transfers coming our way?
Well, I've worked at Arsenal at that level in the scouting world, so they'll be doing everything they can to find to get that striker in. It looks like it'll be a boy from Sporting Lisbon, but we shall see. They have to find that striker. They have to get that striker in, you know. So we have to watch that space. I mean, the business that's been done by Liverpool once again. I mean, Liverpool just won the league, and they've gone out and signed Wirtz for, you know, an absolute top player who could probably play in, I don't know, 3 positions up the pitch, you know, up centrals, wide right, wide left, and he just floats over the ground, got unbelievable balance. Whether he can hit the ground running in the Premier League, because it's such a physical league. I wouldn't suggest he's a physical player. He's a skillful, technical player who's great. He's got great movement and pace. So it'll be interesting how he adapts to the physicality of the league. And they've signed a new right back, Frimpong. Then they've signed Gerkes from Bournemouth. So straight away they've done their business. You know, Man City have done decent business. Chelsea are now talking about João Pedro from Brighton, and that deal's nearly done. They've just signed Liam Delap. They've signed a player called Asugo from Sporting Lisbon, who, when I was at director of football at Hibs, we tried to get him on a half yearly loan. So they're doing good business as well. So but I think the business that's been done by Liverpool has been exceptional.
Do we think that other teams need to step it up a bit more to try and keep up with this? Because, bringing in that many players this season, I do feel like there's space for a lot of teams to start making some moves as well.
There is, but what generally happens in the transfer window is there's a step down. You know, you get your top teams doing business at that level, and then everything filters down to the teams in the middle of the league, the bottom of the league. So sometimes there's an unconscious pecking order that needs to be done, and it's still very early. It's July. You know, these deals, you can get done in August. Ideally, everybody wants their players coming in for the first day of pre-season. Actually, Liverpool have done that. City have actually done that as well. So, but that's not going to happen. You know, you'll still be doing business right up to the last day of the window.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a race towards the finish line before the first day of the season, and super, super exciting. We've got a lot of football to come over the coming weeks as well, with the Club World Cup, then the start of the Premier League season. So super excited.
No, I'm looking forward to it as well. So we'll see who wins the Club World Cup, and I hope it's a PSG Chelsea final.
That will be an interesting one. That wraps up episode 2. Today we explored the foundations of Bittensor and Macrosomos with Will, unpacked how Score is building a decentralised vision layer, and connected it back to the game we all love. In episode 3, we'll be flipping the script, bringing you a deeper dive into Bittensor subnets and Score Vision subnet 44 specifically. Until then, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a question for Will or Max or me in the comments. To learn more or join the community, visit scorevision.io or jump into our amazing Discord. The link is in the description. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.